Hi, welcome to lesson 19, and today's lesson is entitled Change Control. So the objectives of this particular lesson is to go through the explanation and background to what change control is. ICHQ7 details that goes through that in detail. I'll show you the link to that as well in the supplementary material. I would encourage you to go and read that chapter also, so that you can get some additional reading outside of these slides. I will cover the tasks of change control as well as the principles involved, the regulations around implementing change control, how you classify changes, and what are the challenges associated with implementing change control. Now, the references at the end are links to some of the documents that I speak about throughout the slides. So ICH, again, you'll see these chapters listed in a lot of the lessons. At this point, we've covered a lot of them. Today's lesson is around chapter 13, which is the change control chapter. Again, the link is in the supplementary material. So to start off, we'll just explain a little bit about change control and change management, explain some of the definitions that we'll talk about later in the slides, just so you get a feel for what change control is. So firstly, what is a change? A change can be described as any addition, modification, or deletion in or a deletion from a predefined control procedure or system. It kind of speaks for itself really with respect to what change definition is. Now, change management then is a systematic approach to proposing, evaluating, approving, implementing, and reviewing changes. So I've referenced ICHQ 10 as well there for your reference to take a look at that also in your own time. Change control is defined as a systematic approach to control and manage all the changes done to an existing system or to implement a new system. So through a change control, we ensure that no unwanted or unnecessary changes are implemented, and all the implemented changes are documented appropriately. And a change initiator is the person who initiates or instigates that change. And a change control committee is a committee comprising of mainly representatives from quality, which would be QA and QC, as well as other cross-functional members from departments like production, warehouse, engineering, environmental health, safety, reg affairs, even R&D and sales, etc. So they will all have an involvement in change control on site. So the official definition of change control is a change control within a quality management system is a formal process used to ensure that a change to a system is introduced in a controlled and coordinated manner. So tasks of change control. So it's important to note that validated processes and qualified facilities can be very strongly affected by changes, so much so that the actual final product they produce no longer conform to specifications with any degree of certainty. So your defects increase if changes are made. And the same is true for material specifications. This could call for a complete revalidation or requalification of your process or your system if your change control isn't monitored and controlled correctly. So with that in mind, if we just walk through some of the tasks, change control minimizes the risk that changes can have on the quality or the process characteristics. Each change to previously approved requirements requires a review and an authorization to keep the system in its original state of proven suitability. Formal change control guarantees that all changes are evaluated for their effect on product quality or validation status. And change control programs have been recognized as essential elements of the pharmaceutical quality control system. And it's one of the areas that are very highly audited during internal and external audits is your control of your change control system. So principles of change control, change control is considered an essential element of the pharmaceutical quality assurance system, it's logical that the person responsible for quality assurance for the approval of the change control is the quality assurance head, which is normally the QA rep or the QA lead. Change control is not departmental specific, rather the task of the whole company. And the change control monitors all types of changes which can influence the process or product quality and states the measures necessary for implementing the change or decides that a change should not be implemented and therefore the proposed change could be rejected by quality if necessary. So some of the regulations around change controls are any changes in the production and process must be controlled, meaning they must be recorded, reviewed and approved by the QA unit. And all changes have to be proactive, so you need to get change approval before you make any changes to your system. Manufacturers certified to ISO 9000 are required to ensure that any changes affecting quality management systems, including product requirements, product design or developmental changes, they should be controlled. All changes should be made according to approved written company policies and procedures or standard operating procedures, and change control procedures have to be written as a way of standardizing these change instructions. In FDA environments, strict adherence to approved policies and procedures is a key factor in keeping manufacturing operations in a state of control, and it is what makes change control absolutely crucial. So if we move on, we can talk a little bit more about the classification of changes, and there really are three different types of classifications. So the first is a major change, which is a change which is likely to have a significant impact on quality attributes of a process, material, a product, or a procedure. Major changes will be things like manufacturing site changes or formulation changes, changes in the process flow of a product, or even the introduction of a new product on site will have a major change control initiated for that. Change in or a facility extension would require a major change control also. So major changes could shift the process in a discernible manner. So it could affect, if your formulation changes, you could affect the quality of the product, the yield, the impurity profile, the crystal form, particle size, bulk density. It does have a knock-on effect on the quality of the product. So it's reviewed by QA at the facility level, and it has to be approved by corporate, and major changes require prior FDA approval. So if you're changing equipment type, for example, your dryer configuration or your blender type, you need prior approval. And also if your method is registered for related substances using, say, the HPLC method, and you want to change to a TLC method, well, that's a major change and requires prior FDA approval also. So they're just a few examples then of what a major change is. So the next type of change would be a minor change, and this change is unlikely to have a significant impact on the quality attributes of the product, or of the process, or of the material, or of the procedure. So they would include things like changes in the format of a procedure, or a standard operating procedure, or a method, changes in the formats of a BMO or a batch manufacturing record, adding additional steps into the manufacturing cycle for clarification purposes, or changing in layout of a record or a procedure. So they're unlikely to have any quality impact, as they don't directly impact the product. They can be implemented with minimal testing, minimal revalidation, and they can be reviewed and approved by QA at the facility. So they don't need prior FDA approval, but they do need to be reported in your annual reports, which the FDA will require to look at during audits. Another good example of a minor change would be a swap out of a like-for-like piece of equipment. If it's non-critical, then that would be considered a minor change. And finally, a moderate change is something that's implemented to help improve the process, or improve the procedure, or the product or the material. There's no reason to wait for approval for that. It doesn't require approval by FDA before implementation, and it can go into the annual report for review, but it's normally just evaluated by QA at the facility, and it doesn't need to go any further for moderate changes. So this visual is just a flow chart of how you instigate, initiate, document, and close out a change control. So if you follow the pattern of the flow chart, you start with the identification of a change control. So you decide, is it a major, minor, or moderate change? The change control is initiated, then it's given a specific change control number as well as a rev number, and it's submitted to your own department for assessment before it's sent on for QA evaluation. QA will then ask for any risk assessments that come out of the change control, if there are any, along with the level of those risks and how they're going to be controlled. So that's all associated with the change control. There is an interdepartmental SME, or subject matter expert assessment, to make sure that the change doesn't have an impact on something else down the line which may affect quality. There's a regulatory assessment on it also. So if there is something that's already been a dossier or a pre-approval that's already been given, if there's any changes to that, it may need FDA approval before the change is approved. So the quality head will normally accept or reject your changes. If it's accepted, your action plan is prepared, and you're given a certain amount of time to implement the change and close out the change, normally 30 days, but you can ask for an extension with reason, again, given on a case-by-case basis. Your closure plan is documented as well as your effectiveness checks. So if you're implementing a change to improve on something, you need to ensure that your effective checks are in place and that they're monitored and recorded periodically. So whether that be 6 months after your change has been made, you go back and assess your effectiveness checks. So your change control is closed, and at any point you should be able to retrieve that change control and trace back from the beginning to understand the reason for change. So there's quite an amount of documentation associated with change control, and all change controls need to have a standard operating procedure associated with the change. It needs to be logical and easy to use by any department across the site. Uh, and it must establish at least the following steps within the SOP. All quality relevant changes need to be documented. It needs to state that within a procedure. All actions taken, including the need for and the extent of qualification or validation, should be described. So if your process is changing due to major change, then you need to have your actions documented and a discussion around the need for requalification or revalidation if the case warrants it. The records can be archived in paper form or electronically, and the documentation for the change procedure should show that the change was evaluated, so the risk analysis was carried out. And the box on the right are just some of the questions that should be answered if you're reading through a standard operating procedure for change control. Within that document, you should be able to answer these questions. So what types of changes does change control take into account? What are the requirements for the change, and for which area does the operating procedure apply? Who is suggesting the change? How are changes requested? So your procedure should literally tell you that step by step. It should tell you how they're graded and how they're measured, as well as who's responsible for implementing and monitoring those measurements or those actions. Who's involved in the change control team, as well as their duties, how is the change documented, and who is responsible for authorizing the change. So what makes change control so challenging? So there are many factors, but the following are probably some of the more common issues. And the first one is poor communication. So lack of communication between departments, or failure to follow up or escalate change requests, and delayed or inappropriate notification of changes made by suppliers, etc. They all delay the change control process. The second one then is poor turnaround of changes. So timeliness can make or break a production's chances of succeeding in the market, and companies that rely on a manual system to generate data and to route and track submissions and change orders are likely to have a poor turnaround for change implementation, because the system requires more time, obviously, and more effort. So an online electronic system is way more efficient for change control. The problem becomes worse when there is an unexpected change, for example, a deviation, and supporting data is not generated in a timely manner. So delays may also result because of failure to recognise the urgency of a change and the absence of a contingency plan for certain types of changes. The next one then is ineffective documentation. Again, a manual system makes it a lot more difficult to update your documents and include revision histories and to find and retrieve necessary data to support the change. The proposed change may be delayed when an outdated record does not show revision history, or testing may be duplicated because documentation had not been updated with results of a previous test. So manual systems are quite poor at ensuring effective change control. And finally, training is not integrated with change. So adequate training of personnel is a prerequisite in both FDA and ISO environments. When training control is not connected to the rest of the quality process, such as the manual systems, keeping training current with procedures that have changed over time can be difficult. Training tasks can easily fall through the cracks if employees are not vigilant about seeking them and knowing that there had been a procedure update because of a change. So in summary, change is inevitable, and because continuous improvement is impossible without change, progress is built on change. The key to making successful change in the pharmaceutical world is to manage it both from internal and from external perspectives. Changes can happen at any time during a product's life cycle. The impact of the change needs to be balanced against the cost of making the change with respect to safety, time and money. Impact of change may require amendments to register details. So changes must be formally documented and approved via a change control process. It needs to evaluate risk assessments through the change control process. This slide then includes some of the references. Again, they're included in the supplementary material. The ICH guideline document is included here. The change management is here, chapter 13. Again, it would be nice to just take some time out to read those. The 21 CFR, some of the sections are listed here. If you go in through this web link here, and here's 194, laboratory records. Okay. So just to go back in here, the 211-194, the laboratory records are good additional reading material. The US FDA guidelines are also listed here. Again, it would be nice just to go in and take a look at those. There's different aspects of change here, and within each one it talks about the major, moderate, minor changes and how they're implemented using the FDA guidelines. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and we can move on to the next slide.